How y'all doing today? Hey, good to see you. Happy Sunday. Wasn't worship awesome? That was good, man. I'm sorry to cut that off, but we have to get in the Word, and it was a bummer. But hey, worship was really awesome. I don't know about you, but when they sing those really high notes, I try to go with them. I do. I try to get high, and my voice starts to break down because it's not my gifting. Every time I do that, I hear my wife's voice in my head saying, "Stay in your lane," like that's not for you, That's always encouraging when people say, "Stay in your lane." But anyway, I got to tell you, while we were worshiping, I just couldn't help but to think how much I love our church. I really, really love our church. And by our church, I'm not talking about the building, okay? By the way, if there was any inconvenience for you to get to us today, as we've been saying, we apologize for that. It's a war zone out there. How many know, not just spiritually, but actually physically, it's kind of a war zone out there. And so thank you guys for making it. But when I say our church, I'm talking about you. The people make the place, and that's never more true than at Captivate Church. I love this church. And again, we're not very old. We've been around for several months now. And there's many ways that you can build a church. And I think one way you can do it is by adding more bells and whistles and shiny things and more programs. And I'm not saying that all that's bad. We'll do some of that. But then there's this other way to do it where you go in the dark places in our city and you go in the dark places in our life and you lift up the name of Jesus and just see what happens. You know what I mean? And I don't know about you, but I kind of like that other way. And so, anybody love Jesus in here? Yeah, okay. Okay, I was just making sure. I was told there would be people in here that loved the Lord. And so, we're called to build people from the broken place. The broken place is not the easy way to do it. It's not maybe the most popular way to do it, but it's what God's called us to do. And it's not always easy because we live in a me-first culture of convenience and entertainment. How many know we don't need more entertainment in church? We need a move of God. We need a real encounter with Jesus. And I hope that that's what you get today, because I don't have any tricks up my sleeve. If we don't encounter God, I'm not sure what we're doing. But God promised He'd be here, and He would inhabit the praises of us, His people. And so we know He's here, and that's really, really good news. And so again, you hearing God today has much less to do with my ability to preach. It's got much more to do with your willingness to open your heart and give Him your attention for this next few minutes that we have together. And so that's really what it's going to take for us. It's going to take some faith, again, to take this next step of faith, to take new ground. By the way, that's the series we've been in. It's called New Ground. Over these last few weeks together, we've been going through the book of Joshua, which has been really great for us, because if you don't know, we're in the middle of a building project called Wholehearted Home, which is exciting. We announced it a few weeks ago. And we are in the process of trying to purchase our own home. I was waiting. That was your cue. I don't know what happened there. You missed it. It's okay. I gave you space. It's fine. There's grace in this place. But anyway, it's exciting. It's a time when we're doing that. But it's a perfect book for us to study, because the book of Joshua is the story of God's people getting their new home, this promised land. So we've been tracking through that. And again, the book of Joshua is teaching us how to go from a defensive to an offensive Christianity. Where following God is no longer just about how we stop sinning so much. A lot of our life with God is like we're just trying to figure out how to stop being so bad all the time. You know what I'm talking about? And it's a real miserable way to live. I'm not sure anybody would watch us live like that and want to come to church. People would be like, "Do you like being a Christian?" I think so. I'm not sure. There's a lot of rules. I feel bad all the time, but it's great. You should come. It's an inaccurate view of what a life with Jesus actually looks like, right? It's not just about subtraction. That's not what a life with God is, where if I can just eliminate bad things, then I can be gooder. That's not it, right? Goodness is not merely the absence of badness, because you could do nothing wrong and yet still do nothing right. I think what God's called us to is more than that. I don't want to just be known for what I'm against. I want to be known for what I'm for. I don't want to just, use all our energy to move away from things. I want to move towards something. I want to move towards where God is calling us to go and take this new ground and take a risk, right? And that's really what some of us need to do is take a risk. And we're talking about stepping out and doing this for God, full of faith. And maybe there was a season in your life where you were willing to do that, where you were willing to take a risk for God and go for it. Maybe there was a season for you for that. So we have a name for people in church like that. We call them on-fire Christians, The Bible just calls them Christians, but we call them on fire because they're actually willing to take a risk for God. And maybe there was a season where that was you. You're like, "I'll give anything, Lord." But I don't know if you've noticed it. Often, for every one on-fire Christian, we got about 5 people who are like, "Well, they'll learn, they'll calm down. They'll learn that life's not that easy, okay? And all I'm saying is I don't want to become those people where it's like, hey, they'll learn, they'll settle down, and they'll figure it out. I don't want to become those people. What's the point of following Jesus? People say, life's going to get harder for them. It's true, but isn't that the point? Whether I'm in the valley or on the mountain, I'm still lifting up his name. I'm still stepping out and taking a risk. It doesn't stop me. I keep going. I don't want to just make it. I don't want to survive. I don't want to just be safe. Some of us are a little too proud of how safe we are. And let me tell you, safety in your past without risk in your future is dead to God, because you're not going to face God one day. He's going to say, well done, you never fell. He's going to say, actually, you never took a step. I was calling you to something, right? What about the things I was calling you to? When we read the gospel, how Jesus and his followers lived their life, they were on offense in a wild way. By the way, and I was talking to someone after first service about this, if this makes you feel bad, that's not the point. Right? Somebody was like, man, I haven't done a lot for God lately. Dang, that's not the point. Right? If you feel guilty, that's not the point. I'm trying to fire you up because I don't want to develop a community of people who are waiting to get to heaven to see God move, who are waiting to die, to actually live. I want to do it here. I want to do it now. I want to build our faith today. I want to see God do something only he can do. That's the only way to take new ground and take a step with God. And that's exactly where we're going to pick up the story today in the book of Joshua, right? We finally get to chapter 6, which is the famous story of Joshua and the walls of Jericho, right? If you've been in church for any amount of time, you've heard this story. If not, if you're new to church, you've probably heard it anyway. I've heard it a lot referenced and alluded to in culture and in movies and on television. And of course, I've seen it in VeggieTales. Anybody who's seen the VeggieTales episode? Yeah, okay. If you're like, what's VeggieTales? Don't worry about it. Christians are weird. But anyway, it's Joshua. Joshua's about to see perhaps the biggest miracle he's ever seen. But how many know to see the biggest miracle you've ever seen, it's going to take the biggest faith you've ever had. And so this is what we're about to watch transpire in Joshua's life. How does he have this faith? By the way, I'm going to cut this story into 2 weeks because it's a big story. And so I'm going to finish it next week. Today, I just want to read the very first part that I'm real excited about, just when God tells him what to do. That's all we're going to read about. It's 5 verses. Can you handle 5 verses today? 5? We're okay? Okay, great. Let's go ahead and read it. Joshua chapter 6 in verse 1. Here's what the Bible says. It says, now Jericho was shut up inside and outside because of the people of Israel. They were afraid, not really of God's people, but rather of God, of who went with them. They've heard about what God has done. No one went out, no one came in. And the Lord said to Joshua, see, I've given you Jericho into your hand. He was telling him to see something that wasn't there. He was trying to give him a vision of what could be. Do you see? I'm trying to give you something. I'm giving you Jericho and its king and the mighty men of valor. Verse 3, you shall. Okay, so this is what we talked about a few weeks ago. God likes to move, but he waits till he has someone to move through most of the time. So he's saying, I'm going to do something for you, but there is a measure of obedience that's required of you. We're going to partner, actually. Right? There's something I want you to do. He said, I'm giving you something, verse 3, but here's what you need to do. You shall march around the city, all the men of war going around the city once. Thus you shall do this for 6 days. 7 priests shall bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark. On the 7th day you shall march around the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow trumpets. Okay, how many know that trumpets aren't like very scary? You know what I mean? I'm not worried about a trumpet. It's like if you show up to a fight and you bring a trumpet, I'm just not worried about it. This was God's plan to defeat this great city called Jericho, right? Like they showed up with some horns and they were getting laughed at. You know what I'm saying? Like this was God's master plan. And nothing had happened yet. He said, I want you to show up with some trumpets. Verse 5, last verse. And when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, when you hear the sound of the trumpet, then all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city will fall down flat, and the people shall go up, everyone straight before him. God tells them just to worship. How many know that you win more battles by worshiping than fighting? He didn't know that. He hadn't seen it yet, but we know that because we've read the end of the story. But there's 2 parts to the story. But today, I'm really excited to preach on the first part that I have called Jericho or nothing. Jericho or nothing. Anybody in here today, you would say that you are an all or nothing person. Any all or nothings? Yes. Okay, anybody? Come on, you're either all the way in or you're all the way out. There's no in between. Okay, you're a little intense. You're a little crazy. Any crazies in here? You're a little much for people, okay? My wife likes to tell me all the time that I am an all or nothing person. I'm either all the way in or I'm 150% out. I give everything to what's right in front of me or nothing at all. In fact, that's how you know you're an all or nothing person. You use words like everything, nothing, always, never, everyone, no one. And everyone else is like, whoa, it's too much, settle down. You're crazy. Anyway, you know you're an all or nothing person in your life when the longer you spend time with someone, you either make them your best friend or your enemy, right? There's no in between. They're like, is there another option? Can we be acquaintances? You're like, nope. You're for me or you're against me? And they're like, whoa, that's all or nothing. You know you're an all or nothing person that when you go on a diet, you actually just stop eating, right? You eat nothing. And I know some of you do this because I've talked to you. You just eat nothing, right? But the moment you cheat on your diet, you're like, what the heck? And then you eat everything, and your body's like, which is it? I don't know. It's not the healthiest way to diet, but it's all or nothing. You know you're all or nothing when you were either dressed to the nines, like you got on heels and jeans and highlight and contour and all of it, or you've had the same sweatpants on for 3 days, right? It's like one or the other. You're like, how did this happen? You have a stain on there, but you don't know where it came from because you've been wearing them for so long. You're like, I don't know what happened. That's a little all or nothing, okay? You know you're all or nothing if the reason you're single is because you have not yet met the person that you fell in love with within 20 minutes of meeting, Like your friends are like, what's wrong with that guy? And you're like, well, I don't know. I don't see myself spending the rest of my life with him. And they're like, he just took your order, You don't even know his name. Like, what's wrong with you? Give him a chance, right? But you won't. You won't. You won't. Why? Because if it's not love at first sight, it's not love, right? Am I right? No, I'm not right. That's actually a very, not healthy way of thinking. It's not the correct way of thinking. It's all or nothing. And what I'm learning in my life is that when you are all or nothing mentally, sometimes it's hard to move forward. But what I'm also learning is that sometimes that's the only way to move forward with God, all or nothing. In fact, often with God, until you give everything, you're left with nothing. Often with God, until you give everything, you're left with nothing. I'm going to have to explain what I mean by that. The interesting thing to me about God is that he is really notorious for giving us things that we do not deserve. He will bless people that are not following him. He will show up and speak when you're not looking for him. Right? This is all throughout the Bible. There's a lot of examples, whether it's Moses or Jonah, who I'm going to talk about a little later, right? Or Saul before he's Paul, where God will choose to appear to people as they're actively trying to walk away from them. God at times stuns me personally by giving me opportunities I don't deserve, moving and providing when I have no faith, speaking when I'm not even trying to listen. How many of you, you've seen God move in your life despite you? Despite you. Anybody? Despite you? Okay. Some of you with faith? Okay, fine. Despite you, despite your lack of obedience, your lack of faith, right? There's plenty of instances in the Bible, in this church, in your life, in mine, where I was in the way, but I was not big enough to stop God from moving. Why? Because he's good. And sometimes God is so good, he cannot help himself. Even when we don't deserve it, he will still bless us and he will still provide, right? Even when my current state of faith or current set of actions do not lend him to be good to me, sometimes good old God is just good. He's good all the time, but sometimes he expresses it in a powerful way. But having said all that, what I also believe to be just as true is that sometimes God will choose not to move, not to speak, and not to provide, even when we feel like we do deserve it. Why? Because we have not given him all yet. We will all hit moments and seasons and steps with God where moving forward requires all. It requires your absolute yes. And Jesus was trying to teach us this in Matthew chapter 10. I think Matthew chapter 10 is just as important as John 3:16. John 3:16 talks about believing. Matthew chapter 10 talks about following. All right, what John 3:16 is to believing, Matthew 10 is to following. And what does Matthew chapter 10 say? It's got all these scriptures that talk about this. If you want to follow me, Jesus says, you got to die to yourself. You got to pick up your cross. He says later, if you want to follow me, you got to hate your mom, your brothers, your groomsmen, your MySpace top 8. You got to forget all that to step into this. Now, does he really want you to hate your mom? No. What he's saying is this, is that there will be times, there will be steps that you need to take with God where you will need to forego what is familiar, what is comfortable, what is inside of your ability and your plans if you want to follow. If you want to follow. Sometimes it will take an absolute yes. Jesus is teaching here that there will be moments with God where if his lordship is not complete and total, it's not real. And it's not helping you move forward. And all Jesus is doing here is preparing us for what I will call Jericho moments. Miracles in our life, promises to be fulfilled. It's places with God where the only way to move forward is to give all. The only way to see him provide in a new way or to see heaven come down is to give all. You know, for us to go to heaven, that costs Jesus everything. But for heaven to come to us, that's going to cost us everything. But for us to go to heaven costs Jesus everything. He did that. But if we want to see heaven come down, it's going to cost us everything. All right, being able to experience God's presence, that cost Jesus everything. The Bible says when he died on the cross, there was a veil in the temple that was torn. It was symbolic of a barrier that was between us and God that was now gone. It cost Jesus everything for us to experience his presence. But to see God's promises fulfilled, that's going to cost us everything. And that's really important, so I need to explain it. You know, we often love to quote famous scriptures, famous verses. I see it all the time on TV and in pop culture. People are quoting God, but when they do, they often misquote him. They speak about a promise from God that's in the Bible, but sometimes it's missing something. And what I mean is this. Sometimes we're really good at remembering what God said he would do, but we forget what God asked us to do in the same promise. That God said he was going to do something, but there was a part that we had to play in it, right? Because almost every promise from God, we have a part to play. And that's true not because God needs us, but because he loves you, and he wants you to be a part. He gives you lines in the play, if you will. He wants you to get touches on the football field. He's not a ball hog. He would love for you to be involved in the action. He wants to move, but we forget we have a part. And when we forget our part, we'll miss the promise often. Why? Because with God, every promise has a process. Okay, every promise has a process. You show me any promise in the Bible, I'll show you a process that's right next to it. I wanted to take a couple popular ones. There's this one, it's this verse in the Bible, it's really well known. I've heard it. I don't think I watch a lot of TV, but maybe I do. I don't know, maybe. But I've heard this verse on TV, not in Christian television, 3 times in the last month. It's just crazy. And every time I heard it, it was misquoted. Okay? It's this verse in Romans 8:28. Some of y'all know it. Okay? Romans 8:28 is a good promise. What does it say? All things in your life at some point will work out for good. How many said amen? I'll take that one. That's a good promise from God. But how many people know that the sentence isn't over yet? There's like more to the story. You know, there's actually a comma, not a period. And I don't know about you, but in school, I wasn't good with commas. You know, I'm like, is this a comma situation? Should we put a comma in there? I don't know. Like, I was really bad because I talk a lot. I did a lot of run-on sentences. It never ended. You know, I just had another comma. It was like, no, little pause, but not like a full pause. Can we just keep going? They're like, dude, you need to put a period. Can you take a breath? I'm like, no, I have more to say. And so it was like, I was confused about commas. We could have called the message confused about commas. Anyway, random thought, not important. Anyway, there's a comma, not a period. Okay, all things work out for good, comma, to those who love God. Okay, so the first part is, do you love God? Jesus says in John 10, he says, I know who love me because they obey me. Do you say you love God or do you love God? If I say I love my wife, but I'm a multiple-time adulterer, do I really love her? I don't know if that fits. You know, I don't know if that fits. Do I really love her? Do you love God? If not, why would you expect the promise to be true for you? I don't know why we would expect that. But how many know it's still not over? There's another comma. Man, these commas are crazy. Anyway, there's another comma. It says, all things work out for good, comma, to those who love God, comma, to those who live according to his purpose. Do you live according to God's purpose? With your money, with your time, with your gifting, is it your plan or is it God's plan? If you don't live out what God's asking you to do, why would you expect all things to work out for good? It actually doesn't really make any sense. It doesn't make sense. How about one more? I'll do one more. I've also heard this on TV recently. I don't know what it is. It's like God's trying to speak to me through ESPN or something, you know. But it's Matthew 11. Matthew 11 contains one of the greatest promises in the Bible. Jesus says, hey, are you tired? Are you burnt out? Are you sick of drama in your life, at home, at work, in church? Are you sick of drama? And everybody raised their hand. And he says this. He says, I want you to get away with me. Get away with me. Let's go on a walk. Right? I call it the great exchange. He says, give me your stress, and I will give you rest. Okay, how many of you are like, that's a bargain? I'll take it. You know, I like a good deal when I see one. I'll take 3 of those. I'll give you my stress. You give me rest, right? By the way, that's how you know you were in God's presence. Why? Because you left with more peace than when you came in. And if you didn't leave with more peace, I don't know who you met with, but it wasn't God. You might have been praying. You might have been reading. You might be in church. If you don't leave with more peace, I don't know who you were maybe listening to me more than you were listening to God. Anyway, it's a total side note, but anybody want peace? Okay, a couple of you. It's confusing. Okay, I would like peace. Okay, it's like one of the most desired commodities in the world. Jesus says, I'd like to give you some peace, but what's the instruction? Get away. Get away with me. But if you never make time for God, if you never slow down to meet with God, then why would you expect any peace in your life? Right? You might say, well, listen, man, I don't got time for that, you know, to get away. Some of you need to get away for a whole day. And you probably won't find peace until you do. And you're like, that sounds crazy. A whole day? I don't got time for that. I got too much going on. You're right. You're right. You have too much going on. You might have a priority problem. Every time you say, I don't have time for something, please know what you're actually saying is, I'm not going to make time for something. You are the master of your own calendar. And some of y'all need to get away because you are overwhelmed in life. So much so that the 5-minute devotional and the fly-by time with God is not enough. You need to get away. Some of you in here right now have not gotten away yet, even in church. You think about the game you're going to watch later. You think about the bill that you need to pay tomorrow. You're in church, but you haven't gotten away. Can you get away? Some of you need to do that. You're like, well, how long? I don't know. How overwhelmed are you in life? I would say the same measure that you're overwhelmed is the same amount of time you need to get away. I'll let you do the math on that. That's complicated. That's between you and the Lord. What's the point? The point is his instruction is clear. The process is clear. But if we do not follow it, why would you expect it? We shouldn't. This is what can tend to happen in our walk with God. We stop progressing. It's not like he doesn't love you anymore. No, he's got the reckless love. We just sang about it. It's not like you don't believe in him anymore. It's not like he's leaving you. But at some point, we feel like we stop moving forward. Because every step with God will require more faith than the last step. It's going to take more from you. Why? Because the farther you go with God, the less you can take with you. That's just true. The farther you go with God, the less that you can take with you. But a lot of times we progress with God until a point, until we can't give anymore, until God finally asks for the thing that you're not willing to give up. And I don't know what that might be for you. It could be all kinds of things. It could be our sexuality. It could be what we do with our money. It could be what we do with our time. I don't know what it is for you. But this is often what stops us from moving forward with God. And what we do is we actually step back and we live on the riverbank. We live on the riverbank. The riverbank is the place where Joshua is currently. It's also the place where God is calling him away from. It's actually the exact location of the last miracle that God did. But as is true with God, he doesn't want him to live there. It's time to move on. It's time to go on to what's next. You know, some of us have been sitting on the riverbank spiritually, living off of what God did 8 years ago, or what God did at the conference 6 months ago, or the word God gave us 2 seasons ago. But can I tell you, the word God gave you to get through that season is not the word you need to get through this season. The faith that you had before is not the same amount of faith you need now to get through where you're at now, because it's going to take just a little bit more. It's going to take a little bit more. Why? Because God wants to see you grow. God actually believes that you could look like Jesus one day. Did you know that? Like, I don't know what your annual goal was for 2019, but like somewhere on there could be like, look more like Jesus. And that might sound abstract to you. Like, how do you measure that? Just ask somebody around you. Hey, do I look more like Jesus than a year ago? Am I more humble? Is it less about me? Look at your bank account. That'll tell you everything right there. Do I look more like Jesus than I did a year ago? God actually believes that you can. Isn't that good? That's good news to me. It wasn't to you. That's fine. It's good news to me because he's got more faith in me than I have in me. He actually believes I can progress like that. And that's encouraging to me. He believes that we can grow one step at a time, right? But we finally get to the step we do not want to take, and so we stop progressing. And here's what I know, or I notice about people in church. We often will get a step from God or an instruction from God we do not like, and so we'll wait for a new one, you know? You're like, can I get a different instruction or like a different option? How many of you, I like options. Yeah, can I get a different option? And so we'll wait. But with God, he's very serious. He will wait 30 years. Like, this is your next step. Here we are. It's Jericho or it's nothing. Isn't that interesting? Joshua's in a situation where it was no left or right. It was like backwards or forwards. Jericho was huge, but he's like, this is it. It's Jericho or it's nothing. We often wait for a different option, though. And what really breaks that down is this guy I mentioned earlier is Jonah. If you don't know the story of Jonah, I'll just give a quick synopsis. Maybe one day we'll really study it. But Jonah's this man of God. He's a prophet. He's done all these great things. He's got a great resume. But as is such, the farther you go, the more it will take. So Jonah hits his point. Pastor Jonah hits his point where he couldn't give up the next thing. He didn't want to go any farther. God asked him to go somewhere he didn't want to go. And so what you get in chapter 1 and chapter 2 is him running away, like as fast as he, get out of my way. You know, he's like running away from God. But what's interesting about Jonah is Jonah chapter 1 and verse 1, when God gave him the word, it's the same exact verse as Jonah chapter 3 and verse 1. Why? Because God came back and gave him the same word, because he wasn't wrong the first time. He said, hey, this is it. I don't know what to tell you. You're waiting for a new instruction. I don't have one. This is the instruction. It's the same word, except it starts with the word again in chapter 3. Again. God's like, here I am again, same word. And for some of you, God is here today again and again and again. And you might feel like you're in chapter 23, and God's like, here I am again, trying to give you the same word. This is what it is. This is it. He's saying, I know you want to move forward, but we can't go anywhere until you're faithful in this step. I know you want to move forward socially, but until you forgive this person, we can't go anywhere. I know you want to progress romantically, but until you're pure, like, we can't go anywhere. I know you want to raise, but until you can give 10%, we can't go. We can't go. We're kind of stuck. We're kind of stuck. And I don't know what it is for you, but that's what it often is with God. It's the next step or it's nothing. It's nothing. And when we're not willing to take the next step with God, we live on the riverbank. And when we live on the riverbank, we become theorists. We have theories about God that may be true, but we don't know. Some of us only know the goodness, the power, and the glory of God in theory, but not in reality. We see it in here, but we don't ever see it out here. I see what he could do in here. I sing about it, but I don't ever see it. Because at some point, I stop taking a step, and I live on the riverbank. And the riverbank is the place of certainty. And we love certainty. I don't know about you. I love certainty. It's the place of certainty. It's where I can hold on to what I want to hold on to and at least still believe in God. We like certainty. We like being in control. I think, if I'm being real honest, sometimes I'd rather be in a place where I don't need God to move, you know? If I could control it, it's just more comfortable for me. And that's the issue. God's not really moving in the realm of certainty. Because certainty takes no faith. It's boring. It's not really what God is interested in. In fact, embracing temporary uncertainty is the key to a move of God. Temporary. Embracing temporary. Why? Because it requires faith. Man, talk about certainty. The most frequently asked question for this building project is this. Is it certain? Is it a guarantee that it's going to happen? That's the most frequently asked. And I don't blame you, because I would ask the same question. Is it a slam dunk? Is it definitely happening? That's what people want to know. Is it certain? But how many know God loving you, you're going to go to heaven if you love Jesus. That's the whole list of what's certain in life. That's about it, Like there's not a lot of things that are certain. Nothing is certain, and God has no problem with that, by the way. There's no problem. Why? Because that requires faith. In fact, sometimes it is necessary for you to live and move in the middle of what is uncertain and what is not in your control. It's the only place where faith is cultivated. We have an opportunity on earth to have a faith we will not be able to have in heaven. In heaven, things are certain. There's no pain. There's no war. There's no foreclosure. There's no divorce. There's no debt. Amen. Like that. Some of you are like, yeah, that was it. There's none of that. Heaven is certain. Meaning what? I actually have a greater opportunity to praise God down here when things are not certain. To choose to lift up my hands and worship anyway. This is where faith is cultivated. I'm not going to need, when you're standing in front of Jesus, it's like not going to take a lot of faith to be like, all right, oh, the overwhelming. Like it's not going to take faith to say that. It does down here though, because I don't see it. Sometimes I need to walk in the middle of things I cannot control. Things that are uncertain. I'll just be real honest. I didn't share this last service, but I'll say it here. I didn't know this was all going to happen with the construction and whatnot. I don't really like it very much. I was like, God, I would rather us just move cleanly to a building. But I feel like there's something in it for me, if I could just be honest with you. God is teaching me something. There's a level of faith that he's requiring of me to press in and to trust him anyway. And I don't know what it all looks like. I wish for all of us that I could write our story for us. That'd be so great. It would be so good. It would, but there is a level of uncertainty that God is requiring us to walk in to build our faith, even in these days. Because one day we'll have to look back and see what God did, not what I did or not what you did. And that requires conflict and uncertainty, which is funny because people ask, where are you going next in life? You're like, hey, whatever God says. No, actually, whatever you say, because God could call you all day, but you got to have the faith to take a step. He's not going to make you do it. He's too good for that. And this is where Joshua's at. He's at the riverbank with a decision to make. You see, the walls hadn't fallen yet. He didn't know that. We know that the walls are going to fall. He doesn't know it yet. And this is why I want to study this part. This, to me, is the best part of the story. It's the best part. It's too bad that stories aren't what they used to be. Stories used to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And now stories just have an end. Like you see people's after picture only on social media. After the job, after the raise, after whatever, they got their person, you see them after that. That's it. God's not so much interested in that part of the story. He's interested in this part. What do you do when you see nothing and all you have is a word from God? What do you do then? How do you worship then? How do you seek and pray then? This is what God is interested in. This is where it takes faith. Faith is not based on what you see. It's based on what he said. And sometimes that's all you have. All he did was say something. What do you see? What do you do then? What do you do? Last week was interesting. I shared a survey of an article I read a couple years ago. They interviewed 100 people in their 90s. They said, if you could go back in life, what would you do differently? And it was interesting what they said. Because nobody said this. Nobody said, man, I wish I didn't do that. Nobody said, I wish I didn't say that. What did they say? I would take more risks. I would give more away. They weren't talking about what they did. They were talking about what they didn't do. Which is to say what? Perhaps at the end of your life, you'll be more ashamed of what you didn't do rather than what you did do. The opportunities we missed, the steps with God that we missed because we didn't believe before we saw. Right? Obviously, if you could see it, you'd do it. If you knew that person would change after you forgave him, you'd forgive him, but you can't see it. If you knew for sure, if you knew that person would come to church and find Jesus after you invite him to church, you would invite him to church. If you knew the person at your workplace, if you knew they'd get healed after you prayed for them, you'd pray for them all day. If you could see people in that building having a life change, you would give to the building project. We can't see these things. This is before it's happened. We're on the riverbank. It's where Joshua is. He didn't know what was going to happen. It's hard for us to appreciate it because we weren't there. It's actually called hindsight bias. We have a bias looking back because we know the facts. He did not. and he's sitting on this riverbank wondering, what am I going to do? He hasn't lived it yet. But he's got a choice to make, and it's a choice we all have to make. He could read about Jericho, or he could write about it. He could watch, or he could actually be a part of it. And he makes a choice. Right? He says, God's up to something, and I want to be a part of it. I want to be a part of the restoration of my people. I want to be a part of making a home that's not just for me, but it's for generations to come. And we say about the building all the time, anybody that has a life change in that place in the next 5, 10, 45 years is because of the sacrifice that you made. They'll be sitting in someone else's sacrifice as they have a life change. Joshua says, I want to be a part of that. Joshua wanted purpose. You see, the devil's not afraid of you living. He's afraid of you living with purpose. And some of us have a purpose problem. We're sitting at the riverbank trying to, earn more money, trying to get praise from people. Can I tell you, there's no amount of money you could make at the riverbank that could satisfy you like giving to God. That there's no amount of people at the riverbank that could give you praise like hearing from God directly, well done, good and faithful servant. There's nothing like that. The riverbank is an empty place. It's a temporary stay. You're not going to be there long. It will get old. And after a while, it'll feel like nothing. And you realize it's Jericho or it's nothing. And that's really the decision that Joshua had to make at the end of the day. It's going backwards or it's saying, God, I'm going to go for this. It's the next step with God or it's nothing. And I don't know what that decision might be for you today. I don't know if it's forgiving somebody or sharing the Lord with somebody. I don't know what it is. But this is your next step, God says. It's this or it's nothing. This is what I want from you. This is how we progress. Don't make your life on the riverbank. And I'll end with this. I'm going to talk more about it next week. But what gave them the faith to go forward with this? What did God say? Take some horns and start worshiping me. How many know it was worship that won the battle? And I'll talk more about it next week. I'm going to talk a message called Don't Stop on 6. They had to go 7. Keep going. Keep worshiping. Sometimes the greatest way to win a battle is not to fight. It's just to worship. It's just to lift up. And here's why. I'm going to talk about it next week, but here's why. You know that worship is the language of heaven. It is not something that the devil can comprehend or fight against. When you step into worship, when you step into generosity, when you step into forgiveness, these are the things of God. The devil has to check himself at the door. He has no defense against it. You know, when they walked up with their horns, how many know I would have laughed. A horn? Really? I got a bat with some like spikes in it and like a gun, you know. What do you got? A horn. And they were confused because they couldn't understand what is this form of battle. It's God's form of battle. And there's a verse right before they win. It says the commander of the army of the Lord showed up because they brought the horn. You know, they started worshiping and God showed up. But I want to worship, and I hope that it gives us faith to step forward. So would you stand to your feet as we go into a song? I'm going to pray us in.